Senator, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be with you.
Okay, we've got a lot to cover today, and I know we've got a hard stop, so we're just going to dive right in.
Okay.
For guys that maybe are, I don't know, have been living in a cave and don't tune into politics at all, give us a high-level, quick snapshot of what your role in Washington is.
Well, I represent our state, South Dakota, in the United States Senate. Was first elected to the Senate in 2004. I'm winding up my third term, and I have a leadership role there. I serve as the Republican whip. It was the majority whip, now the minority whip, which is the number 2 position in the leadership on our side of the aisle. So, and then I serve on several committees, but have enjoyed doing the work there on behalf of South Dakota. We focus a lot on agriculture, and clearly that's our number one industry here. But my other committee work involves taxes, trade, telecommunications, broadband, that kind of thing. So pretty broad scope of issues that we deal with, but all things I think that impact the economy and hopefully the broader culture of our state.
Yeah, man. Okay, that's good. That's good context for moving forward. So now let's look at the other side of your life. What have you got going on at home? I know you're dad. I know you're a grandpa. So give us a snapshot of what John Thune's dad bio looks like.
Okay, well, I have 2 daughters who, when I ran for office the first time, were 6 and 8 years old. They're now 31 and 33. And one of them is married, has 2 children. The other is married and has 3. So I've got 5 grandkids, all under the age of 4, which makes it very interesting when they all come over. But it's a great season of life. It's a surreal thing when you become a grandpa. I tell people, I'm okay with the concept. It's a little hard getting used to the title.
Right.
Makes you feel very old. But no, you really get a chance to see as your kids become parents and that intergenerational impact. And you still try and stay plugged into those grandkids' lives and hopefully impact them in a positive way. And you want to see them become people of character, difference makers, people who be impactful for their faith. And so it's a challenge, of course, when it's nice when they take them home at the end of the day, but we enjoy it, my wife and I, immensely. And my wife loves being a grandma.
Yeah, man. And it's almost like every dad kind of beats himself up for things that he could have done, should have done. It's almost like grandkids are a second chance in a way, right?
It is. It kind of is in a way. And there's a lot of that in some way, sort of redemption, I guess you would say, and trying to get it right with them sometimes when you didn't get it so right with your own.
Right. So knowing that you're obviously a busy guy in DC, busy family life, how do you balance that?
It can be challenging at times. Typically what I do, and I've done this now for the better part of, essentially the last 25 years, is when Congress is in session, I'm out there. When they're not, when we're not in session out there, I'm typically in South Dakota, sometimes traveling, outside the state, sometimes outside the country, but, most often back here. And we keep our primary residence here. So my wife is here, and we have made that work for a long time, but you really do have to, you have to gear up when you're out there going to work, and when you come home, kind of have to gear down and get back to some of the normal responsibilities of life, like being a husband, being a dad, and being involved in your community. But I think it's kept me rooted. I think it's kept me grounded through the years. And so I have appreciated the opportunity to be able to represent South Dakota that way, maintaining a residence here and spending a lot of time here, because I think it keeps me very close to and in contact with the people I represent. And that's what our form of government is all about. It's it's representative democracy, and you don't unless you're hearing from and sort of feeling the heartbeat of the people that you represent, it's hard to do your job well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as a resident of South Dakota, I think I can speak for everybody. We appreciate and respect the fact that you do make that commitment to spend so much time back at home. So, okay. So now we've got that. We've painted a picture of professional and home life. I always kind of like to start from the beginning. Take us way back. You're obviously born and raised in South Dakota, represent South Dakota. What was it like growing up in small town South Dakota?
I love the experience. I grew up in Murdo, which is on Interstate 90, about 200, a little more than 200 miles west of here, west of Sioux Falls, I should say. And, a town now about 500 people, but it was a small school. So you got to participate in a lot of things. I tell people you didn't have to be good, you just had to be there. So, I played all the sports. I played tuba in the band, sang in the swing choir. I even tried oratory one year, but got to participate in a lot of activities and really enjoyed that experience, the small town experience. I was blessed to have some really good teachers who were committed to, helping me learn and preparing me, equipping me for the future. And obviously small town life gave you a chance to do things, hunting and fishing and outdoors things that I really valued and appreciated. And it was something that my dad enjoyed doing as well. So it was a great experience growing up there. One I wouldn't change for anything. Sometimes I think when you get out of your small town, you get to a bigger setting and you feel a little bit intimidated by that. But the more you get out, you realize just how grateful you are for those experiences and for the way that it shaped your character, your view of the world, and I think really gave you a skill set that helped you succeed. So, I always tell people when I was growing up, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cell phones. My life began and ended at the city limits of Murdo. Typically a big day for us was going to Pier, and Pier had a Taco John's, they had a movie theater, and so that was living large. But sure. But I'm, like I said, I'm enormously and eternally grateful for that experience and that opportunity.
Do you think your small town roots have helped you maintain a sort of a common sense approach to what you do in Washington?
Yeah, I do. I really think that there's a common sense. My dad used to call it just plain old fashioned horse sense. He'd always say, that's just old fashioned horse sense. And I just think that when you come from that kind of a background, you have a perspective on life that I think is different than a lot of the people that you work with. The people that I rub shoulders with and work with on a daily basis, many come from large populated areas of the country, and I don't think relate as well to, in terms of the way they view the issues, even understanding of what it's like to live in a rural area, what some of the challenges and adversity of distance and geography and sparsity when it comes to population, what that can mean. And I think you become, growing up in a small town, I believe, more resourceful sometimes. I think you do have an internal common sense that guides and governs you. And I've always believed I've applied that in my work and in the way that I view things, in the way I interact with people. I think people they call it Midwest nice. But I think that those of us who come from this area of the country are inclined to be people who want to build bridges and try to bring reconciliation, try to find common ground. That seems to me to be a common trait that I see in people from this part of the country. And that isn't to say that people from other parts of the country don't have their attributes and qualities that are good as well. But it took me a while to get used to people on the East Coast because they're very abrupt sometimes, a little prickly. And, we're just very open and authentic. And you have to learn how to interact with all types of people. But I think it's the skill set of being able to work through things, try and find common ground, learn how to cooperate and build bridges are all qualities that I think I learned in South Dakota growing up in the small town of Murdo.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So here's a question that I wasn't really planning on, but would you say that the small town attributes that you just described, I think that it's something that can be learned to a degree, don't you think? And so my question is, how can guys, because I think that's something that most people want their kids to aspire to, regardless of where they come from geographically. So what can they do practically to sort of instill that into their kids if maybe they reside or come from someplace other than the Midwest?
Yeah, I think it's there are definitely things that can be learned. And I think that teaching young people, kind of how to be independent, how to, make decisions on their own, how to be resourceful, how to work with their hands are all things that can be taught. And sometimes you don't have to be in a certain place to be able to do that. because those are kind of universal skills. It just so happens that they come more naturally, I think, when you grow up in a place like South Dakota, where you have to utilize them more frequently. But I do think that if you're a parent in a bigger city, instilling in and teaching those not only character qualities, but also kind of those basic skills are things that any parent can do. It just takes time. And, one of the things, fortunately, that when I was growing up, we had the luxury of, my dad did have some time, although he was a very busy guy. He worked year round and sometimes multiple jobs to make ends meet. But it always seemed like in the evening and occasionally on weekends and Sundays in particular, he had time to plug into things. And the one thing he could do, and my mom used to say this about my dad, so your dad can fix anything. And, when stuff broke down at our house, we didn't, a lot of times you didn't have the money to hire the electrician or the plumber or to somebody come in and fix it. My dad did a lot of that stuff on his own. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, when it came to installing a new water heater or doing things that required welding, replacing toilets, stuff like that. Those were just things that he was able to do. And I wish, honestly, Mark, I had spent more time observing and learning, because, when you get into life, you either learn how to do those things or you pay somebody else to do them. Right. And, if you're fortunate enough to be able to have the resources to pay somebody else, that's great. But it's much better to know how to do it yourself.
100%. And talk about resourcefulness. He didn't have YouTube to look up, how do I weld this?
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, it's trial and error.
It is. Yeah.
Trial and error. I just remember, I remember one time we were doing some drywall, and my dad managed a motel in the summer months. He taught school during the school year, but we were up on the beams, and I stepped onto the drywall and went through, and I tore a big chunk out of my leg, and so it's just bleeding profusely. And of course, my dad, being resourceful, figured out how to do a tourniquet and stop the bleeding. And then we drove to White River, 25 miles south, and there was a physician's assistant down there who was a former Army doctor, and he grabbed a needle and some big old thread, and I've still got a scar about this long on my leg from that. But it's just things that those are things that you learn how to do. You know how to do sometimes by necessity.
Yeah. Well, John, I know your parents they played a huge part in your life, obviously. And I know they're both passed, and I believe your dad passed last August, and I was sad to hear that, because I know he was a special man and played a big role in your life. Looking back, what have been some of the greatest blessings from your parents, from your upbringing, that maybe have translated to your own journey as a dad, or maybe even impacted your role in Washington?
I think for sure the foundation of faith. I mean, it really started there for my parents. And my parents, they were not. They came to Christ later in life. They were in their 30s. My dad was a really accomplished guy. First, really Division I athlete to come out of South Dakota. Started for 3 years at the University of Minnesota as a basketball player. Was the most valuable player his junior year there, and then soon as he was done in 1941, he signed up because I should say the spring of 42 he signed up because war had broken out. So he became a naval aviator, flew combat missions over the Pacific off an aircraft carrier, and shot down 4 enemy aircraft. Was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and so he was just a very accomplished guy. But when he came back to my hometown, by this time he'd married my mom, who we met when he was at the University of Minnesota. And he brought her to South Dakota, to Murdo. She grew up in the Twin Cities. And at that time, Murdo didn't have a gravel main street. It didn't have an asphalt main street. It had a dirt main street. So it was the essence of a small town. And pretty quickly had 3 kids. And just, things they were tough. They were part of the party crowd. They were, the marriage was really struggling. In fact, if truth be told, I think they were pretty much kind of close to maybe, not making it. And a friend of my dad's from high school came back from California, got my dad and my mom involved in a Bible study, and they came to know Christ, and it changed their lives. And from that point forward, their mission was to make sure that not only their kids, but the others that they came into contact with knew him and followed him. So that faith foundation was critically important, more important to them, particularly after they became Christians, than pretty much anything else in life. And to his, to his deathbed, to my mom's deathbed, they would tell you that that was hands down by far the most important decision they ever made, and impacted everything they did since.
Yeah. What a cool story of transformation. I'm curious, maybe you don't know the answer to this, but in a small town, everybody knows everybody's business. And so they go from this one lifestyle, they come to know Jesus, they kind of change their ways. Like, did they get pushback from old friends? Like, come on out, have a drink.
Yeah.
And how did they steer clear of that
Well,
after they kind of profess their faith?
yeah, you're absolutely right. And it was very hard. I mean, they did a 180. I mean, they quit all that stuff. And I just, you talk about something that is truly transformational in a person's life, and that's the power of the Holy Spirit, which, obviously became evident to them when they became believers in Jesus. And so it changed everything they did. And in a small town, the crowd you run with, and, even the church they attended, after a few years, they decided to start another church, them and a few couples. And so that was very controversial, very controversial. And my dad at the time was in the business. He was in a hardware business, which he had taken over from his father, who had since passed away. And, they felt the impact of that. It was very, very hard at the time. And I think, time heals. And I think people through the years, as from generation to generation, started becoming more acceptant of that decision on their part. But it certainly had an impact, and they experienced that in a very personal way. And so it wasn't a decision that was without consequence for them, but it was one, like I said, that they when they made that decision, it was full steam ahead.
This podcast is part of the Edify Podcast Network. Edify is a faith-inspiring app that brings together thousands of the best Christian podcasts in one place for your listening enjoyment. Cut through the noise and grow your faith by diving into the world's top Christian podcasts today. Download the Edify app for free from the App Store or Google Play, or by going to edify.app. That's EDIFI.app.
Let's transition into your political life a little bit, not getting into politics per se, but, coming from a small town, I'm sure what you're doing now was not even on your radar. So how did you get into politics? What did you always have an aspiration for it? Or did somebody did you capture somebody's attention and they kind of took you under their wing? How did that all transpire?
I didn't have an aspiration for it. I mean, when I was, growing up in Murdo, my aspiration was to play in the NBA. Like every young kid, right? You want to play professional sports, but no, I had a chance meeting as a freshman in high school. We have a tournament out in Murdo every year, still goes. My dad helped start it almost, I think, 60 years ago now.
Wow.
And it called the Jones County Invitational Tournament. It's the longest running tournament of its kind in the state. It was a 3-day tournament, and I was a freshman in high school playing some varsity ball. I got into the game Friday night, which would be the second night, the semifinals. And I had 6 attempts at the free throw line. Well, I made 5 of them. So anyway, next day, I'm in the department store, which at that time we had one in Murdo. And I was buying something at the checkout counter, and the guy in the line behind me taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around. He says, "I noticed you missed one last night." And I'm like, "Who's this smart aleck? I made 5 out of 6. I'm a freshman, right? Give me a break." And he introduced himself as Congressman Jim Abner. And he was one of, that time, South Dakota had 2 congressmen in the House. We now only have 1. We're what we call an at-large state. But he represented the western part of South Dakota. And that was my first association with a national or political figure, so to speak. And so I kind of started following him, his political career. He kept following my sports career. And after I got out of grad school at the University of South Dakota, he offered me a job in Washington, D.C. to work on his staff. So I went out there, and my wife and I had just gotten married. And we thought, this is great. We'll have it on a resume. It'd be nice. One of those things that, you can be something you could talk about down the road. And got a chance 4 years later or so to move back to South Dakota. But that experience got me interested in it. It whetted my appetite. It was something that convinced me that it was a place where you could make a difference, a place maybe where I had some aptitude and ability to offer. And so that was really the start of that. And had it not been for that meeting in Lee's department store on the main street of Murdo back in January of 1976, I'm quite certain I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And when I run into young people, I always tell them, you know, when a door opens, don't be afraid to walk through it and see what's on the other side, because
Yeah.
you know, sometimes you plan to do something in life, you have a certain aspiration, thing that you train to do, and then, you know, God opens a door, and that was certainly the case for me. So, you know, lo and behold, here we are. I had gotten a business degree, an undergraduate, and then a graduate, an MBA from the University of South Dakota, thinking that someday, you know, I'd go into that field, and you know, the Lord had other plans. So
Yeah.
it's been a
God
great
puts
ride.
people in our lives to steer
Yeah.
us and open doors, like you said. That's cool. So
Yeah.
now, having been in politics for what, 15, 18, 20 years, somewhere in there.
Yeah, well, some people would say way too long, Mark, but yeah, I think it's approaching 25.
Okay. Yeah. 25. So you've climbed the ladder as a prominent man in DC. You know, you're constantly under the spotlight, being criticized and second guessed for your decisions. So how do you, and I'm not even talking as a politician now, just as a man, like, how do you handle that? How do you keep that from just like shattering your confidence?
Well, it's hard, as you know, it's hard in this era, because the rhetoric, the dialogue has gotten so much harsher. And, you know, the vitriol in politics today is unlike anything I've seen in my time. And, you know, and politics has always been hard hitting. You know, they always say it's not beanbag, and it's not. And if you're going to go down that path, you have to be expect you're going to get attacked, expect you're going to get shot at. But I think today is even more than normal. And a lot of it has to do with social media platforms, and everybody's on them. And, you know, you start reading the comment section, and you can get yourself into a downward spiral in a hurry. So you have to, you basically have to not take that stuff personally, as hard as that is. And I think that has to do with having an identity that is other than something that's shaped by what people are saying about you. And that really comes down again to your relationship with Christ, and the identity that you have in him. And then that obviously, it makes it much easier then if you realize that your worth is not shaped by what other people think of you. And it's important perspective to keep. I've had people tell me in the past that you have to keep your political life and your personal life separate, because if you allow them to intersect, you start believing everything that's said about you. And some days that may be good, although these days there's not much of that. But you know, there's also a lot of bad. It can really drag you down. So you do have to, you know, you've got to put on that armor, so to speak, and just be prepared to, as the arrows come, to deflect them as best you can.
Yeah, I've been rereading Proverbs. It's been a while since I'd read it, and scattered throughout that text, and I can't quote scripture like you can, but you know, it basically says over and over in so many words, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, that's right.
Know when to keep your mouth shut, and don't be
Right.
an idiot. And so that really has me reflecting on how I behave online, and it's just not worth it, because it just, like you said, it spirals out of control. And I think so many people, they just get sucked right in. And I'm sure that's easy to do, or it's easy to fall into that trap when you're at work as well.
It is. And there's so many things that you might see. And honestly, I've kind of tried to make it a practice of getting away from some of that stuff. In fact, we post content on social media platforms because it's a part of my job. It's how we communicate what we're doing. But the feed, the news feed sometimes that comes on a social media platform, for like Twitter, for example, I basically quit it in June of last year. I was like, you know, you can't, because you get up in the morning and you're on it. It's the last thing you do at night. And so it shapes the way you feel about yourself and in the world, and it can kind of get you, just sort of starts dragging you down. So I just really don't, as much as possible anymore, pay that much attention to it. But the harshness of it and the tone, I think, is something that is, I guess maybe it's going to stay with us. Maybe it's a part of the, you know, built in now to the modern fabric of our political discourse. But I hope that we can aspire to be better than that. And, you know, I always hearken back to, you were talking about the scriptures, but, you know, Proverbs 3, It says, do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart.
Yeah.
For so you will find favor and good repute in the sight of both God and man. And I just think that if you speak the truth and, on your social media presence, and do it in a spirit of kindness. I have a friend who says, it doesn't cost you anything to be nice.
Yep.
And I just think if you approach it that way, knowing you're going to disagree with people, but not get dragged into all the personal attacks, and they are many. But I think about, especially if you're a Jesus follower, if the things that you're saying online, would they bring honor to him? Would they glorify him? And I think that's something you really have to think about, because boy, I'll tell you what, it gets out of hand and out of control. And I'm not talking about I'm talking about people of faith too, who get into these conversations and start hurling accusations and insults, and that doesn't, that's just not the character I think that Christ would want to see in us.
Yeah, 100%. Amen. Well, we've been talking about faith. Faith is obviously a big part about how I parent. Plays a big role in how guys listening parent, and it's a big pillar of the Inspired Legacy. As a Christian, I scan the headlines, and the more I learn about this Equality Act, scares the heck out of me.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up here, I'm just wondering, what can you tell us about it? And as Christians, should we be worried?
Well, yes. And I think it's a reason to be prayerful. Pray for our country, pray that there would be conviction brought about that, about our disobedience in some of those areas, and that, that God would bring revival really to our country and help us to view those issues the way that he views them, through the lens that he sees them. And, but yeah, this whole notion of now allowing somebody who is biologically one way to identify a different way, and therefore to be able to compete against, to me, is just a completely antithetical to not only, what God would have us do, but also just the laws of nature. I mean, you just look at things, and he made us differently, uniquely, and with different qualities and attributes, and men and women. And as a father of 2 daughters and now 3 granddaughters, I certainly don't want to see them having to compete against biological boys, and to me, this is really, really dangerous ground. And the House of Representatives has been acting on a lot of legislation that's they're sending over to the Senate that represents a very far left view of the world. And I think we have to respond to that. We have to be engaged with the culture. Obviously, speak the truth, do it in a spirit of kindness. You don't have to go on the attack, but I think you have to stand your ground. I think you've got to stand strong for the principles and the values that the God wants us to live by in obedience, and in the public square, be strong advocates for those values and for those principles. So, don't run away, from people, because there's a lot of the groups promoting that agenda they're very militant, they're activists, they're in your grill, they're in your face. You got to stand strong and project strength against that. But I think when you speak the truth, you can do that in a spirit of kindness, in mutual respect. But we've got to stand up against that agenda. That agenda is very dangerous, I think, to our country and to our heritage. People of faith, people who want to live out their faith and want to enjoy freedom of conscience, religious liberty. All those things are really being threatened by the agenda that's being pushed by the far left in this country these days. Yeah,
I think, standing firm against that requires an equal measure of truth and grace. And I think that's where the armor of God really is going to help us in that fight. And I feel like, I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like there's a way to more surgically, precisely address some of these issues, but they're just coming at it with a sledgehammer. So
yeah, they are. And I think that there's always a better way to do it but a lot of what happens in politics, at least, is there are people who believe that they can achieve their agenda through political means, and they want to use government as the tool to bludgeon people with. to get them to behave a certain way. And really what I think people of faith need to be doing is living out their faith day to day. And that will be reflected in our leadership. I've always believed that the political leadership in this country reflects what's happening in the country, and that when the country starts changing, when revival comes to human hearts, then you'll see that in our political leadership as well. And then in many ways, a lot of people will say, culture is downstream from politics. That politics affects all that, and it does to a degree. But I also think politics is downstream from culture. I think that a lot of times what you'll see is what's happening in our culture becomes reflected in our politics. So if we can start, living out the Great Commission and trying to reach people with the truth, draw them to the Lord, then I think that starts being reflected in the type of people that we elect to governmental positions and leadership as well. So it's that's our mission and our calling, and it doesn't matter whether you work in politics or business or education or healthcare or whatever your sphere of life is. It's to be salt and light, and to bring those values, those principles to bear in your own life, and hopefully to be able to share those with others as well.
That's good stuff. That's a good rally cry, and I feel like it's probably a good place to wrap it up. I want to get you out of here and be respectful of your time. Senator, is there anything else you'd like to say to men, and as it relates to stuff that we've been talking about, culture influencing politics, anything that you recommend guys could do civically to get involved or do their part?
Well, I think one thing I would say, Mark, and I appreciate the question, is with guys, like me, and like I said, I've learned this lesson kind of the hard way, but don't start your day with this or end your day with this. Start and end your day with the Word of God, and I just think being people of the book is so important right now. And the power of the scriptures, and I've been increasingly reminded of that this last year. The chaplain in the United States Senate is a guy named Barry Black, and he has tremendous command of the scriptures, and he's been a real inspiration to me to just be more, to pray the scriptures, to be in the Word, because that's where the power is. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness 3 times, he said, "It is written, it is written, it is written." And he said, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." And so I would just encourage dads, particularly if they've got younger ones that they're going to be influencing, to start them to get into the Word. And as you do, it'll change your character and your heart, and you'll become the kind of example to that young boy or that young girl that you're raising. And so I just encourage dads to be men of the book, be men of the Word, and allow the Spirit to take that Word and start changing and transforming your life in a way that reflects on others. And so, Lord knows we need good young citizens. We need young people who are going to be difference makers. And it starts with us as parents.
It's good stuff. John, appreciate your time today. I really appreciate it.
Always good being with you. And Mark, thanks. And thanks for your good questions, and best to you and your family.
Guys, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation, share it with a friend and subscribe to the show so you don't miss future episodes like the one you heard today. And be sure to check today's show notes for all the ways you can stay plugged into the Inspired Legacy, including my free download called 9 Ways to Be a Better Dad. You can sign up for my free weekly devotional called Inspired Inbox. And you can join the private Facebook group, a community of other like-minded men looking to become the best husbands and fathers they can be. So get plugged in. Like, subscribe, leave a review, and help more guys find the show, because we need more men battling together for the sake of the next generation. Until next time, live inspired.